we're going into the last, but I think one of the most exciting sessions of today's event, Reporting the Machines. We will hear from Professor Aimee van Wynsberghe from the University of Bonn, where she is the Alexander-von-Humboldt Professor of Applied Ethics of AI and head of the Bonn Sustainable AI Lab. And I'm extremely happy that she's going to be interviewed by my former colleague and one of Germany's foremost tech journalists, Lisa Hegemann, who is head of the digital beat at die ZEIT for many, many years. She's also a podcast host. She's also going to be part of our jury, voting on who is going to be among the first cohort of our tech journalism fellows. And I think I will not introduce Aimee's work at this point because I'm sure that Lisa is going to do this. And please give a warm welcome to our two speakers.
Hello, great to be here. Thank you for the warm welcome, dear Maria. You're missed very much at die ZEIT. I'm very happy to be here today with Aimee. And since we have such a light topic today, the question, can machines care? I would just like to say in advance that we of course have all the answers, but we're going to start by we're going to pepper you with a lot of questions. Well, actually not I'm going to do that, but Aimee is. So, Aimee, ever since ChatGPT came into our lives and started the AI hype, AI has been creeping into every inch of our lives. And a lot of ethical questions have come with this hype. Let's try to sift through these challenges together. What ethical questions, to start with a really broad question, do we need to answer?
So yeah, that is a huge question to address. And I think this afternoon we heard about so many different ethical issues, different questions that are on the agenda. So what I would do to answer that question is to walk you through what I call the waves of AI ethics. That I think it's possible to identify different trends. So in many different disciplines, you can see, like what's hot right now, what's trending, and we have the same thing in the field of AI ethics. So, and this is what I pitch as a researcher, and there are other professors who would probably give a different answer to the question. But I characterize the first wave of AI ethics as being sort of the kickoff of the field, and really the focus was on these dystopian scenarios. So the Terminator scenario, the Space Odyssey scenario, AI is literally going to rise up and end mankind, take all of our jobs, the world is essentially over. And the focus here was on superintelligence or artificial general intelligence, not to be confused with generative AI. But really, this first wave of AI ethics is when we didn't know so much about the technology. I'm talking about the ethicists. We didn't know so much about the technology, and there was really this, imagination about what AI could be, what it could do. And that's sort of how the ethical issues came into being and what the conversations were like. Then as a reaction to that, ethicists started to look around and say, okay, wait a second, that technology, this AGI that you're talking about, the superintelligence, doesn't actually exist, right? We're going back a couple of decades. Well, it still doesn't exist right now, and we can get into whether or not it ever will exist or how many years it'll take before it exists. But the ethicists were saying, this technology doesn't exist, so why are we focusing on our attention on this when there are other forms of AI that are being used in society, and there are a whole range of ethical issues that are sort of boiling up in this moment. So this is what I refer to as the second wave of AI ethics. And this wave of AI ethics then has a shift and is looking at concrete applications and or models. So applications in terms of, AI in healthcare, predictive policing, recidivism, looking at what are the ethical issues that are arising in these domains, in these sectors. and or looking at different models or ways of training AI. And so we haven't actually had a conversation about what AI is today yet. And I'm not going to get into that. I'm an ethicist. I'm not a developer or a programmer. But in general, we can say that artificial intelligence is this kind of umbrella term for creating human-like intelligence, and you have different methods, different methodologies for achieving this human-like intelligence, whether it's good old-fashioned AI, symbolic reasoning, machine learning, neural networks, now Gen AI. And then in this second wave of AI ethics, ethicists were starting to identify things that are wrong with particular methodologies of training. So machine learning, which, 10 years ago when people would say AI, they meant machine learning. That was it. Now when people say AI, they mean Gen AI. But it wasn't like this in the last 5 to 10 years. Anyway, so with machine learning, then you had this conversation about the black box. I don't know if you're familiar with this terminology, but the idea that the developers don't necessarily know or understand the rules that are created by the model. And so you have this opacity, this black box where it was referred to. So this is the kind of ethical issue or AI ethics discussion that was happening in the second wave of AI ethics. What are the ethical issues related to particular applications or methodologies? And then following from that, it was, can we create a design fix for these ethical issues that we're raising? And so with the black box example, then researchers were getting into something called explainable AI. And this was all the talk also 5 years ago. We have the problem of the black box. We have a design solution. We can look at how can we reverse engineer or how can we create some sort of, open the black box so that we understand how a prediction was arrived at. So those are the kinds of things that were being discussed in this second wave of AI ethics. And then the research that I'm doing right now is to propose, to suggest, and to push forward a third wave of AI ethics. And I refer to this as the structural turn. So, you know the saying, you can't see the forest from the trees? What I'm trying to articulate or to raise awareness about is that when you're focused on these application domains or when you're focused on a particular model or methodology, you lose sight of sort of the infrastructure of AI. And this is where sustainable AI comes in. So my current research focuses on environmental costs associated with AI. And within this structural approach, looking at, the geopolitics, we had a wonderful talk earlier about how many players are involved in the decisions around the infrastructure of AI. Within this structural approach, then, I'm looking at sustainable AI. And I classify that as having these two branches, AI for sustainability, and there's a lot of attention on AI for sustainability, and then the sustainability of AI, which is looking at the ethical issues related to the making, the using, and the disposal of the AI infrastructure. So that was my comment earlier before about electronic waste. Don't forget about the whole life cycle of the AI infrastructure. Super long way to answer your question, but when you say, what are the ethical issues? I mean, it's huge. It's huge. So that's my way of just kind of putting it into chunks or classes for you.
Yes, and thank you for taking such a broad, making such a broad answer to this broad question, because I think we really needed to put it into boxes, what we're talking about here. Starting from where you left off, about the structural issues with AI, can you elaborate on what these issues are?
Right, and so again, I'll try not to do another 10-minute answer to your question, but when talking about the structural approach, this is, like what Annette was talking about earlier, that there are so many political powers at play. And so to understand the ethics of AI requires that we understand the political dimension, the historical dimension, like we had heard earlier on. And so, to make a sort of distinction or relationship between the second wave and the structural approach, if we think about autonomous vehicles, from this lens or the perspective of the second wave of AI ethics, you'd have ethicists who are looking at the machine learning algorithm embedded into the autonomous vehicle, right? And what are the issues related to how do we train this model? How do we get the data to actually train the model? With the first fatality, it was an Uber self-driving car. This was back, more than a decade ago. And then the question was, who's responsible for this? Who's accountable? Who's liable for this? And then, the debate went on and continues to go on. The developers say it's impossible for us to be able to predict every instance that the car is going to be in. It's obviously the responsibility of the driver. And the driver's saying, oh, it's a self-driving car. I don't get it, right? And logically, it's a self-driving car. So how does this make sense? So in questions from this second wave are looking at, okay, the black box of the machine learning algorithm, how do we, with this particular application, how do we make sense of responsibility, accountability, and liability? But the structural approach looks at, okay, those are very important questions, don't get me wrong, but you have to change the infrastructure of the road system in order for autonomous vehicles to be a possibility, right? And you have to change the sensors on the highways. Well, you have to introduce different sensors on the highways, and you also have to think about which country or countries or continents these vehicles are going to be applicable for. Not every country is going to have the benefit. You have to think about what are the reasons for this in the first place, for convenience and this idea of proportionality. At what cost do we justify autonomous vehicles? So the structural approach is taking a step back to ask these kinds of questions. Our automobile infrastructure is going to have to change to accommodate these autonomous vehicles, which are really for convenience, yeah, and who is going to benefit from these vehicles?
What you also mentioned when we talked about this panel was privacy, which was, of course, a topic we have to address when talking about AI in Germany. And you also talked about this as a structural problem. Why?
So, yeah, privacy. So, also to be specific, I try and be really specific when I'm talking about these things, because if we're talking about privacy in the healthcare domain, if we had started this conversation 10, 15 years ago, privacy was really about, whether you have the hospital gowns and they're open at the back and you want to keep the gown closed so that no one can see your backside. That's what privacy was sort of thought of in a hospital context not too long ago. Or if you're in a hospital bed, depending on if you're in a private room or not, there's a curtain that you enclose around you. So privacy was really about your corporeal body, right? Privacy about who can see you and what can they see. And now privacy in the healthcare context, immediately you just think of data. Who has access to my data, who has control over my data, who's going to share my data and whatnot. So then you can think about privacy in terms of one hospital being able to collect your data and share the data within that hospital. And there are, here in Germany, for a hospital, they're allowed to use the data within that hospital to create an AI model, but it can only be used within that hospital. The second you want to take it out of that hospital, then you have to go through an equivalent kind of FDA approval. Right, so that makes it very complicated in order to share AI models from one hospital to another. So we're building the structure, if you get where I'm going with this. It's not just one sort of hospital. Now we're starting to build a structure. But then you think about, okay, so it's really interesting to have data within a German context. So let's say that we can share data among the hospitals in Germany. That's really interesting to have data within a German context. But then you also want to think about anomalies in the data. So if you have somebody, I'm not from Germany, and so if I go into the hospital, but the data is based on German patients, individuals who grew up, were raised, are used to the climate, the diet in Germany, the exercise routines here in Germany, I don't fit the model. So then it would be interesting to have data from other cultures, other countries, and to have that included into our training of the model. But then you get into, again, right? So our structure is widening and widening again, but then you get into international privacy data sharing issues. So I answer the privacy question with the example of the healthcare data, and to show that when you want to create these models, I guess I didn't say it explicitly, but usually more data is better in terms of accuracy. But again, then we get into this ethics balancing or value trade-offs. You want more data in order to increase your effectiveness of the model, but you have to balance that with data minimization, the principle of data minimization, that really we should only be collecting the bare minimum of data that is needed to actually do the work. So how do you make a balance here? But I use that example to talk about privacy also not just being how do we develop this model, but the taking a step back and looking at what does privacy mean when we want to create the best model. And in order to do that, we need data from different cultures, from different hospitals, from different countries.
When you look at these structural challenges, how even try to solve them?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, and I guess, I mean, to be really fair, right now my research is taking a turn. So I'm an ethicist, and I guess, I'm not sure if you're familiar with ethicists, but usually we're like the least liked people in a room because we always raise these problems. You probably have this too, but like we raise these issues, we raise these problems, and that's kind of like where our job ends, that we're meant to be, people usually refer to me as like the friendly devil's advocate, that I'm in the room to try and help ask these questions, to try and help, whether it's policymakers or academics or industry leaders, help them think through this, to empower them to make decisions. I don't consider myself someone who comes in and say, don't do this or do this. I'm meant to empower leaders in these other spaces to make decisions and to have the reasoning and the rationale behind why they want to make these decisions. But I will say that my research is in the early stages of taking a turn, that I've spent the last 5 years doing sustainable AI research. And 5 years ago, people laughed at me and said that you're just putting two buzzwords together, it's AI and sustainability, and there's nothing there, don't worry about it. And when I see how it's changed, I'm really happy to see how people are so interested in the discussion of environmental costs. Anyway, I'm on a tangent. Right, so my research is changing right now from, I spent the last 5 years doing problem identification and just very critical, these are the problems, this is what's going on, and now, not what many ethicists would do, but I'm trying to now steer into problem solving. How do I make use of these problems and look for solutions? So that's an easy way, that's like a sidestepping your question, that the next stage of my research is to get into the solving, but I am meant to raise issues for people in the natural sciences and the policymaking space, and then together we think about how can they solve the problems, knowing more of the picture.
Which gets us back to the question of the waves, because as you already mentioned, there is sort of waves going into each other, right? So I'm asking this question as our panel is described as can machines care? And we talked a lot about sycophancy here today. Where would you put sycophancy on this?
Yeah.
On the wavelength, I guess.
So normally, I just need to take a step back. Normally, another reason why people don't like ethicists so much is because we always have like it depends kind of answer, It's never like yes or no. But to answer the question, can machines care? I'm going to go with a hard-on no. They can't. Full stop. No, they can't. And I would very much take up the arms for AI is a tool. It's an instrument. And we need to think of it as such to mirror or echo what Sydney was saying. Okay, but then your question about sycophancy. I think it's a fancy word for talking about deception, to be honest. I know it's like all the rage to talk about it, and it was super interesting what we learned about earlier, but I find it, underneath it all, I started out my studies in the ethics of robotics. And this was one of the main things that we talked about, was deception within the human-robot interaction, and how robots are designed in a way, especially social robots. There's this whole field of social robots, which is essentially Gen AI. But these robots are designed in a way to pull you in, to draw you into a more intimate companionship type of relationship. And so the main ethical questions that we were talking about were deception. Deception on the part of the creators. Again, love the point about like, let's stop talking about AI being biased or AI doing something. It's the humans behind the machines. So in the context of robotics, we would often talk about how the robot is deceiving a human individual, and then you go back, no, the humans are making the robot so that it's this kind of form of deception, and it's an asymmetric relationship, one where humans are projecting, again, we heard about the anthropomorphization, but humans are projecting these hopes, goals, wishes onto a robot, onto a Gen AI, and that's on us. And this is an asymmetric, it's unidirectional. And there are really interesting stories, again, picking up on, doing the sort of historical analysis. And I think it's really important that we remember we've gone through this with the robotics space. But the Roomba robot, the vacuum cleaning robot, there's some really interesting studies when you talk about reciprocity. So the idea of like treat others how you want to be treated. There's some really interesting empirical research where individuals would actually give the Roomba a break because it had been vacuuming all day. Yeah, I'm so serious. It's amazing, to think about that. But like, this is like, imagine. And it's the Roomba. It's not even like the amazing Wall-E from Wall-E, yeah, which I would give Wall-E a break, like anytime. Yeah, but even something that's not designed to kind of pull you in, we anthropomorphize, we project these things onto it. And so we need to remember what happened in the robotics space and where that took us and where that continues to take us. And in the Gen AI space, again, it's made to pull us into this kind of interaction, to deceive us into thinking that the machine, might have some kind of ability to care for us or to consider us, but it has absolutely no context. It gives you an output, and that's it. It's math.
Does it matter if they care? Is it not more important if we care?
So that's a really good question, because some people would say, I don't care if it actually cares about me. It makes me feel good. And then you get into making comparisons with human relationships, right? I don't care if my friends actually care about me. I feel like they do. This gets into psychology, which is outside of my realm. But I would say that going back to the can ought. Yeah, so we have a different distinction in ethics, which is the is-ought distinction, the naturalistic fallacy, very similar to what we heard Annette talking about. And so just because we have human relationships that are maybe based on deception, or where lying or things are kind of normal, it happens, it is a part of human relationships. That doesn't mean we ought to program those kinds of relationships in machine-human interaction. That's how I would answer it in terms of, it is possible. Of course it's possible, but should we be going for that? And then I think this also forces us to ask the question, what is the real problem that we're trying to solve? It's a lack of healthcare workers, right? We know that, and coming from Canada, I'm from Canada, we have not only a lack of workers, but you have such distances between individuals and a hospital. So telepsychiatry, telecommunication has been something around for 25, at least 25 years because of the distances. So I understand that there's a need, but in answering that need for more healthcare professionals or for more companionship and human relationships, how are we answering that call with technology? It's a technical fix to a societal human problem, I would say. Mm.
And still, we are in a time where machines mimic our behavior and people build relationships based on what the AI responds. From an ethical point of view, what does it mean for our society when people experience machine interactions as human-like?
What does it mean for our society when they experience machine interactions as human-like? I think you can go either way with this question, honestly, because there's, to be fair, I'm not always like super negative about technology. And so there's this whole area, I'll go back to robotics again, because so much of this work has been done in the robotics space. But there's a whole field called pro-sociality. And the idea is, can we create robots that stimulate more empathic, compassionate interactions amongst human users? So if you're interacting with the robot, through this interaction, can we teach you how to be a better human, a better interpersonal human? So there is research in this space, and there is the hope or the idea that you can create more successful, empathic, reciprocal relationships between humans when you have them interacting with a technology. But then, then you have to also think about the studies in which, when we first were confronted with Siri, Google Home, Amazon Alexa, and of course it's super interesting. Well, then the studies started to come out about like the design questions. Again, second wave of AI ethics. Why is it a female voice? I'm sure your voice is lovely, and I would love to hear Pearl. But why is it a female voice? And there's a whole psychology and gender and technology studies analysis behind this about how this is an assistive device, and it makes more sense psychologically for us to accept that it's a human who is this assistant to us in this sort of secretarial or management role. So you had that sort of set of questions and issues being raised. Then you had the studies coming out talking about how people talked to these devices in often harassing ways, the language that was used, which I won't repeat on stage, I know this is being recorded, but awful things were said, to the point where now there has to be a design fix for this, that when these awful things are said, Amazon Alexa or Google Home or Siri will respond with, don't speak to me like that. That we've gotten to that point. So I give both of these examples to show we could go in one direction with the pro-sociality and say, like, you know what, technology is going to make us better humans. We could think about it like that, and then do the empirical studies to actually see whether or not our hypothesis is correct. Or then we look at the other side of the coin, where we see what's happening already with how we treat these technologies when we're confronted with them in our personal daily lives.
You made a good point that AI is made by humans, so humans have a possibility to influence how it works, how it acts. What responsibilities do developers bear when algorithms simulate affection, but also just basic idea that they are human, maybe not even affection?
Mm-hmm. So I would also like to make sure that I give credit. I'm not the first person on the stage to say that today, that it's the humans who are responsible for the making, the using, and the disposal of this technology. Excuse me. But what responsibility do developers have? So then we get into, how do we define a developer, right? Is Elon Musk a developer? Like, or is it the people in his company, right? The ones who have the title of developer. So who is responsible for what? And then, so that would be the first question that I would have about, who's the developer in question? And then what kind of responsibility are we talking about? So I wrote a paper on this a while ago where I was trying to dissect the concept of responsible robotics and looking at the different kinds of responsibility, right? There's legal versus ethical responsibility. Legally, you're responsible to follow certain checks and balances. Morally, you might say, oh my God, I really shouldn't be working on this project, right? But you don't have much of a choice. You're signed into a contract, right? You have certain obligations as a part of your contract. So there's that kind of realm of responsibility. Then there's forward-looking versus backward-looking responsibility. You're responsible for something that already happened. You have to fix something that already happened. Or are you responsible for anticipating what could go wrong in the future, and you have to put in a fix to mitigate what might possibly, potentially go wrong in the future? So to be like super annoying coming back to you, I would say, what do we mean when we're saying developer, and what do we mean when we're saying responsible?
Well, thank you. Since you have been talking about anthropomorphizing these technologies, I would I would say, is it all right? Is it okay with us that these systems are designed to mimic our behavior and to mimic being human?
So, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm really showing how annoying ethicists can be, because then my question back would be
this is the point of this panel, don't feel bad.
Yeah, but who's us, right? That's how I would answer the question. Who's the us? Is it okay with us? With
us as a society.
Okay. And then, I'm so sorry. And then us as a society, right? There's North America, there's Europe. We clearly have very different ideologies. There's the continent of Africa who don't get to experience AI in the same way. So I do that annoying thing though, so that you can see how complicated this question is. That it's impossible to say like, are we as a society okay with sycophancy or with this anthropomorphization of the technology? And then even within one culture, even within Germany or Europe or the global north, within North America, you have personal differences. Right, you have some people who say like, yeah, it's cool, man, relax, it's okay. I would actually much rather interact with something that's more human-like because it makes it easier and it makes it a more enjoyable, pleasurable experience. And then on the other side, you have people that would say, no, I want to know that it is a tool, that it is an instrument, and I want it to interact with me in that way. I don't want any lines blurred. So you have different sort of preferences. I would say, society right now is kind of on the fence, and then you get into generational differences, right? So my mom, who's approaching 80, is someone who would say like, "Oh, isn't that sweet?" Like in the way that it responds, like that's nice, that's lovely. And then you have my generation who, and at least in the job that I do, we're super critical. We say like, "No, back off." And then you have like my kids, 9 and 12. Who would be a little bit more like my mom, like, that's cool, oh my gosh, look at it said. Or like, that's sus. Apparently this is the new thing, sus. Like it's suspect. And so they would, they want to interact with it in that way. So again, I answer that question in a way to show like just how big and complicated the question is. And then there's so many researchers who focus on these little pockets in the way that I just answered that question.
Then let's get even bigger, because I thought you were going to dissect the human behavior part. What is actually human and what is behavior?
Oh wow, what? Sorry, you're asking me what is human?
Well, what is human behavior really?
Yeah. So again, I'm not a psychologist. I wouldn't dare step on anyone's toes. I don't know if anyone in the room is, but I would say it's interesting that we're trying to emulate all of these human characteristics. So we're trying to emulate intelligence. We have to define what it is. It's the ability to make a prediction. Yeah, we're trying to emulate empathy, reciprocity, compassion. We're trying to. There are these things that scientists identify as being human capabilities, and then they want to translate that into something that is technical. And I would say, like, really, what's the point? Because we have so many humans. And so why is it that we need to make a machine that emulates or has certain capabilities that are human? That would be my first thing. I'm sidestepping your question because it's totally, really... Yes. Yeah, I know. But it's difficult to say what is human from the ethics perspective. So this isn't about behavior, but ethics, in my opinion, is an exclusive human domain. That there are many different schools of thought when you're talking about ethics. You have Aristotelian ethics, virtue ethics, and this is the idea, the pursuit of human flourishing, and you try and cultivate these virtues, and in cultivating these virtues, it's you understanding how you want to be as a person and navigate through life. And then you have later approaches to ethics, which are about consequences. The consequences of an action determine whether or not an action is right or wrong or good or bad. You have principlist approaches, deontology. If you follow a rule or a duty, you have done the right or the good thing. Yeah, that's how you can sort of identify things. But and then you have Ubuntu ethics. So those are Western approaches. Then you have African approaches like Ubuntu ethics, where it's how do we search for and ensure the flourishing of a community. Not me as an individual, but I am because we are. We are, therefore I am. And so you have all of these different approaches to ethics. No one can agree on which one is the ultimate approach to ethics. But they all have something in common, which is this search for truth when it comes to what does it mean to be a good person? How do I know when I've done something that's good or right or wrong? And it's like this thing that we do from the time that we start to develop these capacities until we're on our deathbed. We're constantly reflecting on, like, was that okay that I did that? Was that okay that I said that? It's about us as individuals developing and growing. So then when you talk about, I would say this is a human project. And then there's a field called machine ethics. This is different from AI ethics or robot ethics, machine ethics. And this is the idea that you can program a machine to have ethical reasoning capability. And the problem with this is, which ethical theory are we going to use to program into the machine? Is it the consequences, the duties, the community, the virtues? There's care ethics, feminist ethics. So which theory would we use? And then also, again, I ask this question, why? The machine has no idea of context. It wouldn't know if it was giving you advice to kill yourself or to steal something, what that means. We know that, human beings know that, but the machine doesn't know that. And this is within the realm of ethics. So I would say this isn't about human behavior, but this is about the human project. I believe ethics is something unique to humans in terms of the human project. There's no point in us embedding this into a machine, that it goes against what is, I think, the most interesting, unique part of humans.
Listening to you, it feels like the anthropomorphization of AI systems, machines, robots is basically something that we shouldn't do. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I'm going to go with yeah. Because, I mean, I said to you before, but I said to you before how ethicists are like, well, it depends. But this one, and I would prefer to, let people come to their own decision when it comes to that. But for my own research and the work that I do, yes, I am not in favor of anthropomorphizing machines. And the things that developers or designers do to encourage anthropomorphization, whether it's the sycophancy or having a robot look more human-like or animalistic in nature.
How would a machine have to be built to not do that? Like for it to be a tool that we can use and still be something that helps us?
I know. Well, and then the question is that even possible? Because I gave you the example of Roomba, and Roomba looks very much like a machine. You wouldn't think that people welcomed it into their family in such a way that they want to give it time off and give it a break. So, and then there was studies. I mean, back before we were talking about robots. I hope I can get the example right. But it was like these triangles bouncing around on a screen. I don't know if anyone knows what I'm talking about, but there was like a triangle and a square and something like this. And people would come up with these stories for, it would bounce together and then it would go farther away and farther away. And people would make up these stories that it was like a boyfriend and girlfriend scenario, and they bounce into each other and get into a fight and then go away and they go to their separate corners and things like that. And that was like triangles and squares bouncing around on a screen. So I think this is also part of our human nature, that in order to make sense, we have to tell a narrative, a story that makes sense to us. In order to make sense of something that we see happening, we have to make it fit into our understanding of the world. And that's where anthropomorphization comes from. So I don't even know if there's a design that we would completely not anthropomorphize the technology, because that's what we do in order to make sense. We have to project meaning onto it that we understand. However, so I don't know, the answer to your question is I don't know what we could do in terms of design constraints. However, there is a line that we could create for ourselves. And, I mean, humanoid robots are the thing right now. And creating Gen AI that pulls you into this kind of relationship, we can have boundaries or guardrails that say, we're not going to go that far. We're still going to have certain kinds of appearance. We're still going to cue users when we're talking about Gen AI, the limits of the technology, or the fact that I'm still just a computer. You can take my advice or don't take my advice. I'm just a computer program. That kind of thing. We can create those sort of guardrails to limit the amount of anthropomorphization.
Thank you so much, Aimee. One more. Please clap your hands for Aimee. So I'm closing this off a little early because Aimee needs to catch her flight. But I would like to open up the last 50 minutes that we do have to your questions that you would like to ask Aimee.
Oh, it's on. Yes, I have a microphone. And then all of you, thank you so much. What really struck me, because I think what we see, with the implementation of AI tools, especially in the realms of police work, for example, and Sydney talked about this when we were having our conversation, is that it, often the systems, pattern recognition systems that get, used in terms of police work, they really, make the situation of the least the least resourced group in the room, the minority group, even worse, right? They worsen the situation of people who are actually already under some kind of either racism or And I just wondered how this is informing your work, like thinking about, because you asked, like the question is, who is us, right? And how would we, and how much do we have to take into consideration the viewpoint of the weakest, kind of person in the room?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so I will answer it by not continuing with the predictive policing example, because like I said, my current research focus is on sustainable AI. But what that means for me in my current research is looking at, there's two different gaps that we have. There's the gap in terms of the hidden demographics who are suffering. And so we know more now about ghost workers, but it was brought up earlier, the mining conditions. And then not just the mining conditions, but what happens when you take the minerals, the rare earth minerals out of the soil, you're contaminating the soil, contaminating the water. And then you have the minerals go through their life cycle, and then you have the electronic waste, which goes back to these countries where we already intoxicated the soil and the water. Then the electronic waste is going back. The wires are being burnt to try and get some copper out. The e-waste has all of these toxins that go into the soil and the water. It's this incredibly vicious cycle that we're talking about. And so in my research, I have researchers from the University of Ghana, where they used to have the biggest electronic waste mountain there. I have researchers from the University of Ghana who come and stay at my lab for a year at a time, and they talk to us about this situation. And then together we do research where we can give voice to these perspectives, where we can look at, for example, one of my researchers, a woman, and she said, Aimee, nobody's talking about the female experience when it comes to the climate crisis, that in Ghana, in sub-Saharan Africa, it's the woman who is responsible in the house for clean drinking water. If we are living in a mining community and our water is not, we can't drink our water, it's the women who's going to have to walk farther to go and get water. Or if the soil has all of these toxins in it, it's the woman who's responsible for like a small farm that the family will use for their vegetables. It's the woman who's going to have to figure out where to get new plots of land. So some of the research that I'm doing, or that I work with other people, is to look at these underrepresented voices. But then, so that's looking at the materiality or the externality. But then there's also an epistemic gap in terms of where our knowledge of ethics comes from. And so you have all of these policies and governance structures that are being made in countries like Ghana, and they're replicating a European framework. And so I would say replicating the European is much better than replicating other countries. But, however, they have a different predominant philosophy. Like I said, Ubuntu ethics, where the concern is about the community. I am because we are because we are, therefore I am. And that's not being replicated in their policies. And AI ethicists are talking about Western ethical approaches, but not other ethical approaches. So, and then again, I have these researchers, I have researchers who are doing work in indigenous perspectives on AI. So I'm trying to give voice to the hidden, I wouldn't want to say weaker groups within society. It's just voiceless. So not that they're lacking power or conviction, but they just haven't had the platform, the stage to do it. So this is not about policing, but in the sustainability discourse, this is what I'm trying to do to give voice to underrepresented groups.
Hi. To follow up a little bit on the question of policing, I want to ask you about AI, the use of AI in warfare. Because, I know, really light stuff. Because we are seeing that AI is being used in occupation with, AI automated shooting systems in Khalil, in Hebron, in the occupied West Bank, and that there's different AI models that make decisions on targets with alleged human oversight that investigative reporting has shown is usually just like a okay. To which, we had decades of discussions over Asimov's laws and they're all kicked out. Robots can absolutely kill humans. So, my question is like, so many of these things, these technologies that then also come back to Europe and come back to North America, etc., they are trained on just like all of this incredibly murderous, brutal data sets. Where are the ethicists there?
Yeah.
Are we leaving the ethics of AI in warfare to the tech oligarchs, the police, and the genocidaires?
Yes. Yeah, we are. Yeah. So this is a really interesting question. I had this question at a talk last week. If I'm perfectly honest, there are so many spaces in the AI ethics space, and I am not up to date on everything when it comes to AI and warfare. So I can't sort of quote like this is the latest and what's happening. I do know that back in 2016 was when Noel Sharkey was leading the campaign to stop killer robots. It's called the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots. And he and many others were in Geneva quite often at the United Nations trying to have a treaty, a global treaty against autonomous weapons in warfare. And they got really close, but not every country would sign. And then, of course, as different wars broke out, this kind of fizzled to the background. And then from what I do know last week, speaking with some different researchers, they were talking about what's happening in the Russian-Ukrainian war right now, that drones are the biggest, latest technology, and that these two countries are pushing the borders, the limits of what drones can do, and how it's really quite beneficial on the Ukraine side right now that it's protected certain borders. And once this war is done, God willing, but once this war is done, these two countries will be the leaders in drone warfare, and the rest of the world is going to look around and say like, now what are we supposed to do? This is not my opinion. This is again why I say it's difficult, and I hesitate to talk about AI in warfare, because there's so much to know about it. So, and also highly controversial topic, but there are ethicists in this space. And there's the ethics of warfare, right? There's the rules of just war. So there are ethicists in this space who look at it. If they're working in an industry setting, then they're bounded by non-disclosure agreements, which is an interesting thing in and of itself. But yeah, it's a hot topic, and the conversation is who is going to be the leader, the next leader when it comes to AI and warfare. I don't have the answer for that. And the attempts to stop it have been squashed.
I wanted to ask about the deepfake technology, because it's one of the technologies that we are seeing now. It's billions and billions of dollars in both actually creating deepfakes and detecting deepfakes. And it is studying cyberpsychology, researching. It is under-researched. Also the influence on the human psychology and the cognition is very under-researched. But I would like to know how ethics or ethicists are seeing this technology and its influence on our society.
So again, I would say in a similar way to how I answered the question about AI in warfare. So I'm not an expert on AI and deepfakes, and to be careful, there are people who the only thing that they focus on is deep fakes and the ethics of that. I'm not one of those people. I know that it's a very a loaded conversation, and there isn't so much momentum because, and I don't say this from my own, this isn't my opinion, but there's so much attention going to other topics, and this is where we had I think it was led by Sam Altman, but a few years ago we had all of these statements coming out about AI being the greatest existential threat. So we had this 15 years ago, and then we had this resurgence of this first wave, as I called it, and that has acted, I think also, Anessa was talking about this distraction, so that has also added this kind of distraction. Then people are focusing on things like consciousness, AI consciousness, rather than on things like deep fakes. But and I was just, I just had a stat from earlier today that I can't remember. Whether or not we can tell. It's Google's new program, Banana. Yeah, Nana Banana, thank you. That it's now becoming so difficult to know when it's an AI-generated image. And so those kinds of things gear people up to talk about it, but I would agree with you that it hasn't received the attention that is so deserving. Although, I mean, Taylor Swift, was that a year ago, right? She did a good job of a few months. No, I mean the sex.
She was a victim of the fake campaign, and her fandom were defending her. Right.
And so she did a good job of keeping the conversation alive and going. But yeah, I would say it's, at least on my radar, in my echo chamber, the things that I hear about aren't deep fakes as much as other things. So sorry, that's not a good example, or that's not a good way to answer your question, but tried.
So I think we have time for one last question, maybe two, if the answers are short. Yes, trying to pick a man for once. Let's go with.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Maybe it's an easier question to answer, not really on the ethical side, but maybe more on the coping side. How do you, in your research, or in your general approach to finding problems and identifying trends and stuff like that, how do you deal with the dwindling pace of new developments, new actors, new models and stuff like that coming out? How do you keep an overview of what's relevant for ethics as well?
The dwindling pace, like the decrease in pace?
The
increase.
Yeah.
I was saying
just the crazy pace.
Yeah, the crazy pace. How do I deal with that? It's tough. I mean, like you can see, I can't go deep into deep fakes. I can't go so deep into that, and I can't go so deep into AI and warfare because it's impossible for me to be an expert on all of these topics. So how do I deal with it? I have actually one of my senior staff is obsessed with tracking these things in the news, and so he does like a rundown for me once a week, 15 minutes. What are the trends that I have to know about? Different things like that. That's That's to help me out, because also, to be fair, a lot of my time is spent. I have a lab with 16 people, so I have to supervise them. I have to do management things. I have to sign everybody's, papers and things like that, and then try and do some research on the side. So I have an amazing team where, when we have our meetings, they're talking about this is what we think is going on. This is what we find relevant. But it's also events like this where I get to listen to the amazing people that we listen to. And to now, I will leave this thinking more about AI in journalism, and thinking more about medical, not companionship, personal assistance, I guess, if you will, like Pearl, and things like that. So I get a lot of inspiration by being at events like this.
Okay, who has a very short question for the end? Okay, I'll pick you.
I wanted to follow up on my colleague's question on AI in warfare, but just a really short one. Can we agree on the fact that it is important to look at the political economy of the data and the model, and under which circumstances the data is generated and then used for a model to be trained on? I think that's the question you were asking, basically, that it matters if Palantir Technologies is generating data in Iraq or Afghanistan and then using it for a model that is then being used in Germany. Is that something, if we look at the, political economy of the data, to assess the ethical implications of an algorithm? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. The question is who is going to do it? Who is going to assess this? And then also, to be clear, it's super short, but there's a difference between ethics and regulation, or ethics and the legal realm, right? Ethics is something that's non-binding, it's voluntary. Ethics, like I was talking about before, is how do we want to live? Yeah, and sometimes we translate that into guidelines. And here in Europe, we had, I was a member of the European Commission High-Level Expert Group on AI. We created the guidelines for trustworthy AI, which was based on human rights. This became the foundation, or the precursor to the EU AI Act. Yeah, but ethics is different from laws. So what you're talking about is creating something that's much more concrete than just an ethical ideal. So you can use the ethics as the baseline, as the guideline, to create these kinds of rules of operation, rules of procedure, rules of just war in an AI world, is what I would consider it to be. But these are binding rules. Then we're outside of the realm of ethics. Just to, okay. Can we do one more question? Because Annetta had her hand up.
Yeah.
As a speaker,
Sorry.
I would say.
Thanks so much. In my view, a lot of the problems that arise in the space come down to one issue, which is that responsiveness to user preferences, subjectively defined, is considered a core aspect of profit maximization. So OpenAI just went through this with the November update. People had an uptick in AI delusions, right? So there was this weird phase last year where a lot of people went really crazy, thought they were Jesus, thought they were, the next star in whatever domain. And so OpenAI responded by cranking things back down a notch, but then got a ton of backlash. And so then actually reversed course in light of market pressure, saying if you're above 13, you're going to get the ability to have a little bit more of that responsiveness. Now, if you're a bad person, the kind of results that you're getting will just validate that. So that to me is the central problem. So the larger structural issue is kind of hard to fix just with that. And so it strikes me that actually poses an interesting problem for this audience, because communicating that connection between responsiveness, which sounds kind of good, and nefarious profit maximization, which sounds kind of bad, communicating that effectively to governance and policy audiences by journalists, by civil society actors, seems to have not worked so far. I think there's an opportunity, though, for people in this room to communicate more strongly on that issue and to make a more positive impact on how governance mechanisms are construed. Do you have thoughts about how to frame that problem more effectively than it has been so far? Because right now, unfortunately, OpenAI's decision hasn't received a lot of critical coverage. There's certainly room for more.
Oh, that's a big question to answer quickly.
Sorry.
And that's okay. That's okay. No, super interesting question. I would answer that. I have like a few different streams of thought, but I'll do it like super quickly. So first, I would say, again, this idea of taking a step back, we need to recognize that we are in the middle of a social experiment. AI, the way that it is used in society right now, is a social experiment. It's not this like finalized technology that's being rolled out in a responsible way. We are literally in the middle of an experiment. And so I would say, in terms of the rolling out of GPT-4, where was the beta testing, right? So like, how is this something that wasn't caught ahead of time? That would be my first sort of, this doesn't answer your question, but this is getting more to the point of like, where is the regulation? Because again, this goes beyond ethics. Right? Ethics is, having these reflections on like what could go wrong, how do we prevent it? But this is something more. How is it possible that the sandboxing wasn't taking place where we could predict what might happen in this situation? So that's the first thing, the experimental nature of it, the guardrails or the governance mechanisms to predict this before it became such large scale. And then I would refer to the Pearl example, where it was made very clear the founders of the company were saying, we're not a for-profit company because it doesn't allow us to have the kind of control that we want to have. And so I think it's beautiful to see when the people in charge are saying, no, we have a vision and we're not crossing these lines. We're not crossing these borders, these ethical borders that we've created for ourselves. And even if the public is saying, we want it. Yeah, they also want, the public wants a lot, right? It doesn't mean we should give them, right? There's the is-ought again. It doesn't mean that we should do everything that they say. That would be another thing that I say. There was one other thing that I wanted to say, but I can't remember, and I know that Lisa's going to cut me off.
I think your plane is going to cut you off. Yeah. So thank you so much for thinking with us today, and thank you for all the questions you've been posing that now we have to answer. Thank you so much, Aimee.